right. Well, here we go. Welcome to another episode of Aftershocks on AftershocksTV.com on the CMSPN, the CMSPN network. And joining us today for this episode, we've got a 50-plus year veteran and jack of all trades within the music and entertainment business, and he's here to talk a bit about his new live record along with his band, The Mistakes. Records out now on Die Laughing Records, musician, actor, and radio host, Mr. Michael DeBars. Michael, thanks so much for coming on. How you doing?
I'm delighted to be here, and I'm doing just fine. I really am. I mean, it's so classic nowadays when you say to somebody, "How you doing?"
A lot more meaning to it now these days.
Yes. Yeah. Are you okay? Mm-hmm. Is everything all right? Do you speak? Have you made love to anybody recently? I mean, 6 feet apart, you made love with someone. That's impressive. Not for me, of course. It's not impressive, but yeah. But, I'm doing great, man. I mean, the advantage to my radio gig is, I do it from home where I am right now. Looking at my Otis Redding poster, and I don't have to go through that whole thing. So I'm very fortunate that yet another reason to adore Stephen Van Zandt, which I am on a Series XM Lord Stephen's Underground Garage. So that's really good because I can do that. I can play music, but I'm not a Zoom creator on a musical level. I don't like doing that, man.
Right.
It's hard. I need to be in the room with the guys and the small, like the EP sounds is what it is a small club rocking and rolling, which is why I did that record. And I did that record pre the disaster.
Okay.
It was our second gig. And I thought, my God, the rehearsals were so good. I thought we should go in and do all these songs, these bluesy, Stevie Marriott, Faces, Stonesy type stuff, which everybody loves. I'm sure you two love that.
Of course.
So,
sure. Yeah.
And then the shit hit the fan. And I went to the archives because I record everything. And I thought it was good. I mean, there's no overdubs there at all. It's absolutely what you hear is what we gave that audience, 200 people. Wasn't Live Aid, man. It was the complete opposite of that. I had 200 roadies. Never mind 200 people in the club.
People.
But it was back to that roots thing that I love. That two guitars, bass, and drums, and a singer, and sure. that is to me is the height of happiness.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the EP. It's consists of all covers. It includes tracks from your 70s outfits that you were involved with Silverhead and Detective. It's got some other songs on there as well. Of course, you got Marvin Gaye. You got on there a cover of him. You got T-Rex cover on there. And I think what's really great about the songs is that you and the band really put a nice, real heavy street punk spin on all of them. It's not just a cover played the same way it was originally written and recorded. And yeah, we've been seeing a lot of veteran rock artists like yourself out there during this pandemic covering songs from some of their influences as a way of celebrating the nostalgia and history of rock and what it meant to them in their youth. So talk a bit about the record in terms of what was the impetus for you to put out a punk rock version of all these great 70s classics.
Well, I wouldn't really describe. I'm very sort of wary of categorization.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that it was punk at all, although I was the biggest fucking punk in London in 1970 for sure. I was wearing a dog collar before Johnny Rotten was born, but the vibe about the EP is that I really wanted to get into a room with these guys. I've been making a lot of records with Stephen Van Zandt. I've been writing, scoring stuff for TV shows, but I wanted to achieve that moment when I was 20 years old, and I wanted like-minded guys to do that with me. And I remember I worked with a lot of them before. They're all very terrifically talented session guys. But underneath all of that is that desire to rock, It's just to kick fucking at 3 chords, loud as you can get, because loud is an instrument, loud is as important as my eyeliner. but I wanted to do it because I love that music. And, in terms of interpretation, I always use the analogy, I'm an actor. I've done, 120 hours of American television, 40 movies. I've done a lot of work, a lot of theater. And one thing I do know is you can write a role and it can be interpreted in any number of ways. So I looked at doing Marvin Gaye's What's Going On in my way. And my way is what's going on now, rather than what was going on in the 60s. But it really, when you get it down to it, it's the same fucking problem.
Right.
People not embracing each other, and this division, this dreadful, decadent division, not even decadent in a velvet sense, in a just an ugly sense. So I wanted to get back to the roots of rock and roll, and I did.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, one of the things I read in the press release that really caught my attention was that you wanted to showcase this record to the younger generation of rock fans. Obviously, there is such, an enormous generational difference, musically between the generations, especially the way the younger generations consume and view music. I mean, it's been devalued, music since the digital age sort of took over, and it's just real challenging, I guess, to relate to, a lot of the millennials when it comes to what music represents, especially in hard rock music, where it used to be so dangerous, rebellious, and now it's real safe and it's really sort of no longer individualized. So, I mean, how can an artist like yourself, who's been in the business for decades, how could you attract, or at least attempt to attract, a younger audience these days, since the rock and roll spirit is, it's very different than it was, than it was in your youth?
I don't care.
Okay, yeah.
There you go.
There you go. Perfect. Okay, simple.
I mean, I could give a shit, I mean, they dig it. They dig it. If they listen to the Struts or something, fine. Greta Van Fleet, these tribute bands, essentially. I'm not trying to turn anybody onto anything. I do what I do. If they dig it, they dig it.
Sure.
At this stage of the game, man, I'm 22 years old. So I could give a monkeys. I could give a shit. I mean, sure. It's funnily enough, 5 million people listen to me every day, and 80% of them are under 25.
Wow. Interesting. Okay.
But I'm playing Howlin' Wolf.
Right.
And I'm playing the Temptations, and I'm playing Sam Cooke, and I'm playing Otis, and the Stones and all of that. This morning I played Stray Cat Blues, and I wept with how great it is. Great things last forever, but only to a certain generation. I'm a huge fan of Billie Eilish. I think Childish Gambino is incredible. I think Cardi B is absolutely exquisite. It's not that I don't appreciate what is happening now. I love so much, but I don't expect people to, jump up and down when we do Little Richard.
Right.
I don't, the real truth of the matter, you guys, is on a metaphysical level, I don't expect anything from anyone at any time. I just deal with what is, and that audience, that came to see us, the smaller the better, because you're playing to people that really want to feel it, and so to answer your question, I don't compare generations.
Sure.
Sure.
It seems an absurdity to me.
It does. And I have to say, I think you're lying about your age. I think you're at least 25, Michael.
Oh, shit. Did you fucking tell him my real... Edward, you're fired, motherfucker. You told him how old? That's... You fucking wait till I've done, you wait till I've impressed these guys. Okay? And I'm using the word press. Okay, go ahead. No. But I'm healthy. I've been sober 40 years off heroin, Sure. I mean, I care about myself enough. I'm narcissistic enough not to do heroin,
Sure.
because ultimately it's a kid's stuff, It's,
right.
It's for children, and they should get rid of it as soon as they possibly can, and I'm using that as a sort of an example of how ridiculous it is. Like Club 27, I'm Club 72.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to die old and leave a gorgeous corpse. You know what I mean? I'm not going to subscribe to that sort of. It's too obvious to die young.
Right. Yeah. Well, Michael, you of pretty much every artist I could think of. You are one of a very, very, very small club that has been able to transition from music to TV and movies successfully. I know there's guys that have done it and they do bit parts here and there. You really have had, I would say, more of a video career, for lack of a better term, TV, movies, etc., than music, in the public forum. You've obviously done both for your entire career. What is it that you were able to do to transition so much more successfully than most people?
The transition was the other way around, my friend.
Really?
I did To Sell With Love when I was 17.
That's right. Yep. Okay.
So I was not a musician. I went to every club in London. At 16 years old, I left this boarding school. If you might know, I had no mother or father. So I stayed in these schools in the holiday period, and I would read everything and listen to the blues and so on. At 16, I went to drama school, and within weeks, I was on the set at Pinewood Studios looking at Sidney Poitier and Lulu and so on. And at the end of that movie, the Mindbenders came on. And do you remember that at the end of that movie? Do you know that movie, To Sell With Love?
I know of it. I'll put it that way. I'm only 52, Michael. That's from what?
Have you seen Citizen Kane?
Citizen Kane, I have seen, yes.
Well, don't be a fucking asshole. That was done in the 30s. Give me a break.
Fair point.
Have you ever read Hamlet? Have you ever read Shakespeare? No, okay. So that's ridiculous. You got to see that movie. It's one of the greatest movies ever culturally. It was these young kids with a black teacher. 1967, Sidney Poitier was the biggest star in the world, and he was a black guy.
Wow.
So I learned a lot that particular experience. But what happened was I did a nude musical in 1970 in London, and I played this androgynous rock star, and Andrew Lloyd Webber came to it, and I sang, was singing. So he said, would you come and sing demos for Jesus Christ Superstar? So I did that, and I was doing it with Ian Gillan. You know who Ian Gillan?
Yeah, of course. Purple.
So I'm doing Ian Gillan, and we're singing these demos, and Andrew said, you really should be in a band, because I looked the way I looked with the hair and the makeup and all of that, and this is 1970, 71, something like that, way before really that all hit, glam vibe and sort of experimentation, hashish. And he said, all right, go to Deep Purple, had a label called Purple Records. And he took me over there, and, I put Silverhead together with their help. And that was my first band. So it's all happened to me by mistake, hence the name of my current band.
Okay.
Because all of these things have not been planned, but I didn't have to make a transition. I'd already worked on a couple of movies, and I did a TV series on the BBC. So I was a young actor, training as a young actor. But the more the culture shifted from that to, the aristocracy suddenly became Mick and Keith, rather than, Sir Laurence Olivier or Terence Stamp or whoever, even Bowie was doing that, and Mark Bolan and all those guys, they're all young actors. Phil Collins, Steve Marriott, they're all auditioning with me for various roles, Oliver on Broadway, Oliver Twist, and all of the different things. So there was a real mashup of art students, Ronnie Wood, etc., and drama schools, and with Bolan and Bowie and all of that, studying mime, and but we all became, rock and roll musicians. So there was no real transition. I see no difference between the two, really. I think it's a matter of self-expression, and people say to me, Michael, which do you prefer? Well, it's an absurdity, Christmas or a weekend in Malibu. It's all the same. I mean, the self expression part of art is what's important to me, not the mode.
Sure, but don't you find that music gives you more of a freedom to fully express yourself, where a lot of times with acting, you're playing to somebody else's interpretation of what they need?
That's a lazy explanation of it, that when you hear people, actors, or that, what you do is if you've got a character that you're going to study and play, it is the most exciting thing, because you've got to create a character. It is creation that is what is the drug.
Okay.
So if you're creating, getting an audience off, creating a song, it's exactly the same thing as creating a character. I mean, if you read Murdoch, which was reasonably, successful at doing for
Sure.
5 years and an Emmy, was that I originally, when it was written, it wasn't anything to do with what it became. So you bring, I mean, if Danny Kaye had played the Marlon Brando role in On the Waterfront, it wouldn't have been, you know what I mean? It wouldn't have been the same movie. So you create those characters, and so the restrictions are almost what get me off.
Sure.
You can't waver. You have to do that. You have to be that guy. And that discipline, I like that.
Do you have to really fight to do that sometimes? I mean, do producers try and limit you, and you as an actor have to push back, or has it always been that they understand you as an actor and give you the freedom to take the parts where they go?
Well, as you can see here, I don't give a fuck. If any producer said do it this way, I'd walk, just get the limo and leave.
There you go.
Fair enough. Well, Mike, I'm going to just go back to the music real quick. You alluded to before with Silverhead that, when you guys started, you were signed to Purple Records, which was Deep Purple's record label. And you must be I would think probably the only artist, though, who's been signed to not one, but two major bands labels. Obviously, with Detective, you guys were on Swan Song Records, which was their label, Led Zeppelin's. Talk a bit, about both those experiences, being on the labels of two of the, all-time greatest hard rock bands in history. And do you think that even though the prestige of being associated, with those acts at the time, it was enormous, in the end, do you think it could have actually been a bit detrimental? Because normally when bands, they start their own labels, it's to release their own music. So when they assign other acts, there's sort of a chance that a band is simply going to be maybe ignored or just won't get as much push as they should.
You're the first guy in this stupid business to ask me that question.
Oh, good.
And it is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Wow.
You're living in a shadow of an iconic artist that is difficult to get out into the sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much as I love Jimmy, Jimmy Page is not a record executive.
Yeah.
Jimmy Page is not a promoter. Jimmy Page is not a manager. So we were left in LA. We got $1 million in those days. This is the 18th century. And we ran around waiting for Jimmy to produce us. It was a fucking disaster. It was a mess. Those records are great. They're really good records, but they were not promoted because of the fight that Swan Song, we're under the aegis of Atlantic Records. I don't want to get too, business-like about this, but the question is so right on, and nobody's ever seen that. Purple, they could care less. The management of Deep Purple created the label under the aegis of Deep Purple that would attract, artists. And we were one of those artists. I had no idea. I could care less about any of that at that time. All I wanted to do was get laid and wear velvet and weigh 123 pounds. I mean, I wasn't thinking about percentages and tours. And we were on tour for 250, 60 nights a year, for 2 or 3 years. Worked our asses off and loved every second of it. But yeah, it was an issue. It was a problem. We're living on the shadow of greatness, and it was difficult to be great when you're under the shadow of greatness.
Sure. Yeah. Speaking too of Silverhead, I just want to talk real quick about, obviously your guys' self-titled debut was produced by the late, great Martin Birch, who just passed away this year. Talk a little bit about, how it was working with him, especially at the foothills of your musical career. And what were some of the things, you kind of maybe took from him as a young, musical prodigy there during the 70s in England?
Well, I depended a lot on the band and Martin and Peter Robinson, too, who played piano, and the guy that, Susie Quattro sang on that record. I just interviewed her myself, and I'd forgotten all about it. But we had a fantastic team around us. I knew nothing about the machinations of rock and roll, and
Mhm.
And it wasn't even a situation where I found myself learning. I didn't learn anything. I was too busy, having fun,
Sure.
Mhm.
and taking advantage of the absurd caricature that rock stardom is, and so I didn't spend too much time worrying about the drum sound, dude.
Mhm.
I wasn't that kind of guy. I wasn't Todd Rundgren,
Right.
I was Jack the Ripper compared to Todd Rundgren, on that level. But I had no interest in learning anything.
Right.
Okay.
I was really, really cocky bastard because I believe you have to be.
Right.
I
Sure.
believe, if you don't believe in yourself, who will?
Who's gonna? Yeah.
Right.
And I learned a lot from the band, from the Silverhead, because they'd been in playing in different bands before me, and I learned an awful lot. I learned how to write a song, and that was the fascinating part. But in terms of the technicalities and learning how it all works, that came later.
Later. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. At that time, I was just in an opiate heaven, which is the
Okay.
title of my next record, obviously.
Nice. Well, while we're talking about bands and projects that you've done, Michael, talk about the Power Station and Live Aid, because my God, you as I understand it, and you can certainly correct me if I don't understand it correctly, you kind of jumped into that almost last minute, and then you're playing in front of literally millions of people between the crazy crowd at JFK and the
world.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about not only how that came to be, but is that one time that you actually had nerves? I don't see you as being nervous ever, but
Never.
playing in
I
front
was
of
never nervous. I was never nervous about it. No.
okay,
I thought, you lucky bastards, you've got a rock and roll singer. You see, I had to think like that.
yeah,
Whenever you go in for an audition, this is something perhaps maybe if you're youngins are listening on a musician actor level, you've got to go in there with utter confidence, even if you're faking it. Because what terrifies people, I think, the most, I'm generalizing here. I'll get into the Live Aid thing because it's outrageous how that happened. But I would really say, have confidence in yourself. If you're going to practice anything, practice being confident, even if you're lying.
right,
Because you go into that room and own the room. You can get that role or get that gig in that band, but the minute you open that door into a rehearsal room and the band is waiting for you, you can get it right there in the frame of that door. It doesn't matter what you do when you get on them. It's a feeling, it's a vibe. So the Power Station was pretty wild because it was 85. I'd written Obsession. It was #1 everywhere. I'm in Texas with Don Johnson. He's doing a movie. We're having a laugh. I've known him for years. He's with Miss Pamela and, blah, blah, blah. So I'm there with him and I get a call and it's Wayne Forte, the really iconic promoter in New York. And he says, Michael, there's a band needs a singer and they've got a tour booked. Would you be interested in coming and meeting with them? And I said, what's the band? He said, I can't tell you. I said, well, yeah, okay. I said, get me a limo and get me a room at the Carlisle Hotel, and I'll come to New York. And he said, okay. So I got on the plane. I went to New York. There was a car. I got in it. We went to Manhattan. I went to the office. I go in the office as Tony Thompson, the dearly departed Tony Thompson, genius drummer, the best drummer ever, and John Taylor, beautiful man, dripping with sweat, nervous, millions of dollars at stake. I go, fuck me, it's the Power Station, #1.
right,
Yeah.
At the time. So then they go, okay, you'd like to, because Andy had seen me with Checker Bass with Jonesy. We opened for Duran, with Steve Jones, and he watched us, and he thought of me which is how I met John and Tony. And though I go to the record plant, they take the dearly beloved Robert Palmer off the thing. I take the cassette, I get on the Concorde, I fly to London. Same day. All of this is happening. It's like Texas, New York, London. Andy Taylor, wait, 6 hours. I go to the Dorchester, check in, go to the studio, no sleep. I wait for him. He comes in a billowing marijuana cloud of smoke and 2 bodyguards. And he's completely out of it, and he goes, all right, Michael, and sing. The 6 hours I spent getting it all sussed, you know, the sound and the thing and the room and the vibe and get it on. And yeah, something like that. And I got it all sussed. And then I sang a verse and a chorus. I swear to God, I sang a verse and a chorus of Get It On. And he presses the control button. He says, let's go shopping.
Wow.
Okay. So we did. And I spent thousands of dollars of Duran money.
Oh, nice.
Got back on the Concorde. This is all true. Got
Wow.
back on the Concorde, flew to New York, went to the Carlisle Hotel, ostensibly to rehearse that next morning. Don was in New York. We go to dinner. This is absolutely true. We go to dinner, Chinoise restaurant in New York. It's 85. And as we're leaving the suite, the phone rings and it's Danny Goldberg. Do you know Danny Goldberg?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Brilliant man, my manager at the time, and I adore him. You know, he was with Zeppelin. I met him with Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So he says, Michael, I have, pretty bad news. I said, what? I'm at the Carlisle with bags of clothes here, and I'm going to dinner with Sonny Crockett. Hello. And he says, you're out.
Mm.
I said, what? He said, you're out. Palmer's back. He's going to do the tour. Yeah. So, it was a fun little trip, huh? I go,
Wow.
no, it wasn't. And I've got all these bags of clothes. So I just say to him, do I have to give the clothes back? I said, and he said, probably, Michael, I'm sorry. And DJ, who's like such a powerful guy, he goes, come on, Mikey, let's go eat. So we eat. Who's in the restaurant? John Taylor.
Wow.
Okay.
DJ goes over to John Taylor, says, can I have a word with you outside here?
Oh boy.
It turned out that John was a Sonny Crockett fanatic.
Okay.
They go outside the restaurant. They're gone for about 10 minutes. John was a little tipsy and comes back in, and DJ sits with me and we eat. And I go back to the hotel, 7 a.m. The phone rings and it's Danny, and he says, you're back in.
Wow.
I said, how come? And he said, and this is pretty amazing stuff. I haven't talked about this for a long time. Robert Palmer's peeps clearly were fucking with Duran peeps, in that Robert Palmer ended up getting a bigger slice of the merchandising. And it was all a ploy.
Wow.
And
yeah.
I could care less how I got there.
Sure.
Right.
But 3 days later, I was standing in front of the biggest audience in history in my spectacular clothing that I'd bought in London. Oh. And Bill Graham was screaming at us because Andy's amp had blown up. Bill Graham, for your audience, is a notorious, difficult man who was a promoter in San Francisco. Incredible, but mad and very angry. And I could care less.
Right.
I was in heaven. And I remember when Tony hit that snare drum, I jumped off that drum riser, and I jumped 80 feet high, and I stayed there for the next 10 minutes, And it was an amazing feeling. And that night we were in the same hotel as Dylan and Ronnie Wood and Madonna and Tina and you name it. And I'll tell you, there was more shenanigans in that hotel that night. I could write a book about that. There's your documentary. Never mind the gig. I mean, the hotel was that was like so fun. So all in all, I've led a blessed life.
Sure, you definitely have. And
Yeah.
real quick with the Live Aid thing, and I know this is nitpicking 35 years later, but as a kid watching it, I remember watching it, and I'll be honest, I had no idea that you weren't Robert Palmer, to be honest. I was just a kid. I was, I didn't pay that much attention. I just was like, yeah, this kicks ass. But I remember being pissed because you guys didn't play Some Like It Hot, which was like the single at the time. Were you in any way part of that decision, or did they just say, we're going to play Murderous and then we're going to play Get It On and that's it?
No, as I said, the amp blew up, and we had. And that just negated the idea of doing Some Like It Hot. We would have done Some Like It Hot at the end. Or so, we all had 3 songs each.
Sure.
And because the amp and it's live. It was live all over the world. That's why everybody was so tense. I mean, I've never seen superstars so nervous, you know, and I could give a shit at that point because I just, you know, I was just happy. And you know, we didn't do something like that. So what? I could, you know, I mean, you know, I mean, you could have sung "Merry Christmas." I'd have been fine with that.
No doubt. Well, you mentioned the one song that you had written but had been done by Animotion, which was Obsession. Very different from what your style, I guess. You know, obviously
yeah.
much more.
Well, I'm a writer, you know, it's the same thing. I get, you know, comedy, tragedy, R&B, you know, whatever. I mean, I'll do whatever is needed, you know, and what they needed was, I was just off narcotics, and I wrote a lyric called Obsession, but it wasn't about a romance. It was about the drug, you know. And then Chapman introduced Mike Chapman, the brilliant producer, Blondie, and you know, The Sweet, and so many different bands and acts. Very, very, very clever man. He introduced me to Holly Knight. Holly Knight, one of the great writers of all time. Love is a Battlefield, Better Be Good. To Me, you know. So I sat with her, and then I realized what she was playing. It was romantic, and I thought, well, I've got to turn my love of drugs into my love of a woman, and so I did accordingly. And then I suddenly thought, well, wait a minute, who do you want me to be to make you sleep with me? You know, was the hook, and that became the title of my documentary. You know, who do you want me to be? And I suddenly realized that's what life was at that moment. Was I was being whatever anybody wanted me to be.
Right.
I was like being cast. God was my casting, you know, in these various different, vibes, and it made so much sense. And she did the music, and then we sang it, and I sang in a deeper register, sort of like Depeche or that sort of vibe that was happening, and you know, rather than a high Marriott thing, it was lower and more, you know, personal.
Right.
and the world fell in love with that song.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it frustrating when the song really took off, in terms of not only frustrating, but maybe, you know, because here's this huge hit that you originally did, and now here's, you know, this band covering it, and then it takes off.
Don't you know me by now?
Well, you say you don't give a shit. I know you don't give a shit, but you know.
I don't. It's not that I don't give a shit. It's that I'm grateful.
Grateful. Okay.
I'm grateful that these people, they were great Animotion, fabulous people, and they took it to #1 all over the world. You know, the version that we did was not as commercialized and as clever as they did it. So what it would be really dumb to sit there going, God damn it, I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm a grateful guy, you know, and I thought they did a great job, and it was their only hit. Their only mistake was that we'd written another one for them called A Woman's Weapon, is a woman's kiss, you know, and it was beautiful. It was so sexy. And they said, now we're going to write it. We're going to do ourselves, you know, that the classic up, you know, and they did, and they didn't. But I was delighted. You know, you see, I don't think that way of, oh, it should have been me. If I thought that way, then no matter how big you get, you continue to think that way. There's always somebody better than you. My dear and closest friend, Gabriel Byrne, red carpet, John Travolta, you know, and Brad Pitt, and you. You know, there's always somebody more important, more successful, richer, cuter. Nobody has cheekbones like mine, but essentially, I'm not competing with anybody. You know, I'm just doing my thing, and I'm blessed. I was grateful that they went to #1 in 27 countries.
Yeah.
Oh, sure did. Yeah. Well, you know, too, with Silverhead and Detective, you know, personally, I think both those bands could have been and should have been much bigger than they were. And I think what it had to do, just in my opinion, was probably a lot of it was the timing. You know, with Silverhead, I mean, once you guys really started to make waves, the rock and roll landscape, especially in the UK there, was transitioning, you know, from, you know, that glam rock sound that you guys had to a more hard and progressive one, when you had bands, obviously, like Genesis. Yes, there was just rock just kind of going in a different direction once you guys started to get big, and then Detective was sort of a similar thing where you had bands like yourselves in L.A. and Legs Diamond, those kind of really really solid radio rock bands. But then once Van Halen came in, boom, they took over the Sunset Strip and changed pretty much rock music across the globe for decades. I mean, do you agree with those bands? Do you think it was the timing that really prevented you guys from taking off?
No.
No, he didn't. Okay.
Let's take what you said through. Progressives. We were a rock and roll band, like the Stones. What happened after us was punk. Not progressives. You always had
progressive rock was pretty, it was pretty big at the time.
You had Procol Harum in 1967. You had, Genesis. There were lots of wonderful bands that were progressive in the late 60s. If you do your homework.
Well, I did my homework, but globally, I'm talking globally. Maybe locally, but I know
we're
globally.
Talking bands, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking genres of bands changed.
Sure.
I don't think you said we were overtaken by progressive bands. That's
I would say overtaken. I'm just saying a lot of that sound started to really take hold more, became bigger across the globe.
It's all means nothing to me. What I tell you means something is there was a guy called Johnny Rotten came along, and that changed things.
Sure. Okay.
Not Peter Gabriel.
Okay.
In my view. Secondly, Eddie, God rest his soul, was a force of nature that wiped everybody away. And my deal with Detective was I was a heroin addict, as was, shall we say, the people around us. And that didn't help. The band just didn't have that spark. It had the music and stuff, but there's many, many other reasons for bands that don't make it, as you say, make it, then, because what I say with all deep respect is what you're asking me is very obvious, that you're thinking of why didn't they make it? And you're saying Legs Diamond guy in the way, you know what I mean? It's not about that.
Well, I didn't say make. I just say you didn't take off as much as some of the other bands at the time. That's all. Not saying make it.
Yeah, but you asked me why. Right?
No, I just said no. My question was, do you think that had something to do with it? Like I said, Van Halen coming in and sort of taking over.
I don't. I'm not a surgeon. I'm not cutting up and thinking why something happened.
Sure. Okay.
Many reasons, as I said, drugs were the main reason that we didn't have the focus to. We had the shots. We did that. Gene loved us, and we did all those Kiss tours. But it's, you're either going to make it or you're not. The reasons for it are really intangible. For me, it was, I wasn't present because of the heroin. I just wasn't there, because it's a lot of glad handing and it's a lot of press and DJ, stuff. I would never have sat and talked this long with you guys in those days.
Sure.
2 minutes an hour. So, and it's important to, and you learn. I learned from interviews like this. In those days, I could care less. It's that carefree and careless life. It wasn't other bands.
Okay. Right? Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, I want to go back to acting for a couple of minutes.
Me too.
For me, you've played a bunch of parts. You've been a bunch of different characters. But you will always be Dog from Scum of the Earth to me. That. WKRP in Cincinnati had two iconic episodes, the Turkey episode and the Scum of the Earth episode.
Yeah.
And you just dominated that. So talk a little bit about that appearance on that, because you really did. You were very much the standout on that episode, and it became one of the standout episodes of that show.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, Hugh Wilson, who wrote and produced and created the show, wrote this thing. Punk was happening, and this is like 1977, maybe something like that. And it was the height of the punk thing. And I'd already seen, and met Steve up in San Francisco at the last gig, and I knew the jig was up when the Pistols arrived. That's just another side story, but
sure.
WKRP was fascinating because it was written as dog collars, ripped shirts, safety pins, all of that obvious crap. And I said to Hugh, put us in suits, dude.
Yeah.
Put us in suits. It's so much funnier, you know, now I'm talking like this, and you know, I never had none. And some posh bastard, you know, throwing. It's much funnier to see a guy in a suit throwing a TV out of a window than you know, the image of Keith Moon doing it.
Right.
And I think that's what the audience enjoyed. That it was funny, but it was also kind of curious and interesting. You know,
It definitely was. And it was a nice little promotion for Detective, because they had the swag in the studio of Detective, and
well, that's the one thing I did that I'm the most proud of in my entire career, was putting a Detective album on the set.
yeah, it was.
I'm only kidding, but I mean, you know, yes, I think actually Monarch or one of the band did that, put the album cover. I thought that was brilliant, but it was the end. It was, you know, we weren't talking to each other. It was this, we were that, and the acting discipline, you know, it takes over, you know, because it was a mess, you know. I'm sure you guys have come across that situation in bands that have self-destructed because of their ego or whatever it is, you know. And in that case, that night was magic. I mean, you know, for years and years afterwards, people have loved it, and we got nominated for all sorts of things because of it. But that night was a beautiful night and a fun night, and everybody was very relaxed, and it was funny. And it's, you know, the other thing about all of that is, you know, my Seinfeld episode too was that, you know, people just love it. And they come up to me, or they used to when I could go outside. The only thing with wearing a mask is I don't get recognized.
Right.
And that really pisses me off.
Yeah, that's no fun.
But same thing with Seinfeld. You know, these shows are on telly all the time, 24/7. It's extraordinary, all over the world, all the time. So, you know, yeah, WKRP was fun.
Sure. Do you have any parts that you actually regret, that you watched it back and you're like, oh, why did I do this, or why did I choose this script? Or
it was just that porn movie I did in '78.
The porn movie.
I shouldn't have done that. That was a huge mistake. I don't want to talk about it.
And you're stressing huge?
No. Yeah, right, exactly. No. No. I regret nothing. Je ne regrette rien, as Edith Piaf would say. I can't regret a damn thing. There's a couple of them that were like a little, you know, tricky. Directors fired and replaced, and, you know, showbiz. Yeah. I've been through so much, you guys, you know, as you have, and you know, you get disciplined about having to deal with difficulty. I remember. Okay, I got a story. I did a movie, Night Flyers. I don't know if you recall, with Catherine Mary Stewart, and it was a sci-fi thing. I was playing a kind of a telepath.
Sure.
And Bianca Jagger was cast as my wife.
Okay.
And we're doing a scene in bed with Bianca Jagger. And she's got a mirror under the pillow, which she would pull out in between takes and just check everything out. and check the lighting with this mirror. So the director, who was a young nutcase, was furious, because how dare an actress not trust the lighting that he's created? I was saying, that's Bianca motherfucking Jagger. You know, so please. So he fires her.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow, damn.
On the set.
Oh.
And I'm just going, I have so many questions to ask Bianca Jagger. And you know, because Mick is like, you know, the guy. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And so that was, and then I'm working, and they got another actress in that afternoon, boom, you know, Hollywood, bang, there it was. And while she was getting ready to leave, and they were all discussing about what on earth they should do on set with me in the bed, you know, sitting there going, fuck. And then, and I got a PA taps me on the shoulder and says, Bianca would like a word with you. Would you come downstairs and talk? And he said, he ain't going anywhere, said the director. I mean, so these are the little tales,
right? Sure.
Of show business. Sure. So you're asking if I regretted something. I deeply regretted not going down there and saying, I'm so sorry, that was so rude, and I have a mirror under my pillow.
Sure.
It was so that was pretty shocking, but you learn.
Right.
Everything is a lesson.
Another role that you played, and it was not a starring role, but maybe it's just me. It stuck out with me. Was I loved you as Ivan Greer in Poison Ivy: The New Seduction. That was when you got in the little fight and everything. I was like, this is like great. It was like the best part of a bad movie. And I'm not shitting on. Well, yes, I am. I'm going to shit on that movie. It was not a good movie, but your part was really fun at the beginning of the movie, and it stood out to where when I saw that we were interviewing you, that was the first thing that I wrote down was I wanted to ask you about that part. Is that even a memorable part to you?
Oh, yeah, very much so. It's very accurate that what you're saying. I thought it was very well written, my role, but of course it was all about Jamie. I mean, it was Jamie. She was 20. It was Jamie Presley we're talking about. It was her first movie, and she was adorable and gorgeous, of course, and still is. And it was a good role. It was good. It felt good that I did some good work, but you never know until it's cut. You never know, man. I mean, it was the same with Detective. I didn't know the record would sound like that at the end. It's strange things happen. I mean, it's been years and years and decades, of this, but things change, and you have no control over it, and it is exasperating if you let it be. But that's interesting, and thank you, to pick that one out. I enjoyed doing that a lot. Just because it was low budget didn't affect my high hopes.
Sure, definitely. And one last question, Michael. I heard, I don't remember when this was. This is at least 5 years ago, maybe even longer. I heard you on Sirius talking. You were sort of talking about your ex-wife Pamela's books. You were talking about how much you enjoy her books, and I don't necessarily want to talk about your ex-wife as much as I do.
Sure.
I really found your definition of the quote unquote term groupies to be fascinating, because the way you positioned it then, and maybe you still do now, is you took all of the filth that is associated with the term away from it, and you really made it sound, you took away the ugly connotations of it, and you made it sound more of a not dignified, but a proper thing with the women in the 60s and the 70s, and in the way that they lured artists and made artists write about them and stuff. And you specifically referenced Led Zeppelin calling to come.
Nobody lured anybody. You see, this is the misnomer, and I guess we'll end on this note.
Okay.
Groupies. My ex-wife, Miss Pamela, and a lot of those girls were revolutionary feminists.
Okay.
They did what the fuck they wanted. Do you think we'd be sitting here talking about boys that fuck women and say that they, that they would denigrate them?
Yeah.
If a woman loves Mick Jagger and goes to the hotel where Mick Jagger is staying so she can see him, meet him, be with him, absorb that magic, and she succeeds in that, is that lurid?
Yeah.
Is that against nature?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make her lesser than? Or does it make it exciting? Does it make it iconoclastic? Does it make it revolutionary? It's fucking equality. When I realized Miss Pamela was, way before I ever met her, when we made that movie together, that this was this bunch of girls in LA called Girls Together Outrageously, and they did whatever they wanted. Let me tell you a quick story to end this interview. Miss Pamela's in the wings. Led Zeppelin are going out on stage in Madison Square Garden. As each member of that band goes by Miss Pamela, they each are all wearing turquoise bracelets, if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Every member puts a bracelet on Miss Pamela's arm. 4 turquoise bracelets, and they go out there and kill for 4 hours and come back and take their bracelets back. That is not a lurid tale. That is poetry.
Right.
That is rock and roll history. So to deny and negate the whole notion of a groupie This is why I really, really have a lot of problems with Gloria Steinem and her ilk. Because first and foremost, Gloria Steinem was a Playboy bunny.
I didn't know that.
Profound nerve to detract and negate the joy and licentiousness and eroticism of the girls that got close to the fucking Rolling Stones, and so on and so on and so on.
No doubt. And I think this is a good place to end, Michael. Of course, you do have the new release, Michael DeBar and the Mistakes live. It is fantastic. It's definitely 6 songs that will take you back to the glorious days that still continue on in rock and roll. So, Michael, why don't you give the plugs out real quick? Where can people find you? What station should they tune into on Sirius, etc., to hear you?
I was just thinking it's rock and roll Viagra, that EP, in many ways. Sirius XM Channel 21, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. East Coast, 9 p.m. to midnight on the West Coast, Monday through Friday. Little Steven's Underground Garage, Sirius XM Channel 21. And it's just a wonderful gig. And I highly recommend that you listen to the station in general, but specifically to my show. That would be great. It's a delight. You guys know your shit. And I am really, really happy about that. It makes it so much more interesting than telling you about, some silly story with the bass player in Spain. You know what I mean? So we got down to some funky stuff, and that's good.
Yes, we appreciate you sharing that stuff with us too. We do. Yeah,
absolutely, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Michael. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening to Aftershocks. For more episodes, go to our website at www.aftershockspodcast.com. Visit us on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for more news and information on the podcast. And be sure to subscribe, listen to, and review all episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other podcast platforms. For your music listening pleasure, visit our website or go to www.shockwavesradio.com. For all comments and questions, please email us at info@aftershockspodcast.com.